Alrighty, welcome to the JavaScript Lifestyles Podcast. My God, what a crazy week this week has been. And we're a little late doing this week. Unfortunately, normally I try to target Monday or Tuesday as the days that we drop a new episode. Luckily, we dropped the extra one, which was the State of Lambda School 2021. As a quick update on that, I did shoot that out. I did tweet that specifically at Austin Allred. I did shoot that over to Lambda School. Haven't heard anything back. Haven't had any negative blowback or any of that. I think that if we're speaking from business perspective, Lambda School does do a pretty good job as far as PR, and they probably felt as though a smaller podcast really, coming back and having a conversation and addressing it would probably do more damage than it's worth. But that leads us to our next episode. Episode 5. This is another in the Skills2Know series. This one we're going to step out of software engineering specifically, but we're going to talk about a more generalized soft skill that you need to know. And that is talking about resumes. To get a job, it is critical to get a solid image to your employer. A large piece of that is making sure that your resume is on point. While this is a bit out of sequence, this is one of the most critical aspects of gaining employment. It is. It really, really is. In this podcast, we will examine both general resume writing best practices, the practices specific to software engineers. Some of this is going to be review for those that have gotten jobs in the past in the industry. But the hope is together with the advice given, the resources that will be listed in the show notes, you'll be able to take your resume to the next level and gain employment much more rapidly than you otherwise would have. We're in a good place. As last week, I'll be honest with you, part of what we were waiting on to record was that I lost my last shock mount, and in process had to swap from one mic to another, so the sound is going to be a bit different. This is a newer mic, so hopefully the quality is a little bit better on that end. And the shock mount, I actually went for one that is built out of metal this time instead of plastic, because plastic apparently sucks. So let's talk about resumes, right? Resumes are a critical component of the hiring process, and a ton of effort is put into it, not only screening, but almost psychologically profiling potential staff just by taking a look at the resume. Recruiters and HR teams have this down basically to a science, and have combined with a ton of different software, your ability to get past the gatekeeper of major companies is really, really rough. Just getting that initial interview for a lot of people is basically an uphill battle. One of the pieces of software that's used basically globally and almost without fail at this point by mid-size and larger companies, it's what's called ATS, or the Applicant Tracking Systems. The ATS is basically a restyled CRM or customer relations management style tool, but it's got some additional features that tie specifically into vetting a potential employee. And it basically, the way that it works is you're going to submit your resume, your application. It's going to go through a piece of software, which basically is going to look at keywords. It's going to look at, format, layout. It's going to look at timetables. And it essentially puts you into like a tiered ranking, which makes it easier for the HR teams and the recruiters to actually find the standalone talent and the best of the bunch. The argument here on why they would use it is pretty damn reasonable, right? It's a hard one from the perspective of, trying to get a job, it gets frustrating because it is really effective at doing its job. And those who are trying to break into the industry, it's going to be much more difficult than somebody who has, say 2 to 5 years of experience or 10 years of experience. It's definitely going to be harder to get a job because of ATS. But here's the argument, right? The reality is that larger companies, get anywhere between, tens, if not thousands of resumes a day, if not a week. And back in the day, that would have amounted to printing thousands of resumes a week and having people manually review resumes and then, kicking the filtered resumes up to a more superior HR person or recruiter. And then that person would, make a decision on who they wanted, make some calls, get some interviews set up, and go that route. This fixes that. And this, we've talked about on the podcast that, humans by nature, we innovate to make our lives easier. This is one of those tools. And if you look at it specifically from a tool perspective, it's actually kind of cool. It's a good idea. It makes sense. But at the same time, for those of us that are looking for jobs, we want to bash our head against the wall because it makes it very hard, right? Automatic filtering, scoring, there's a lot of things to it. There was at one point, I don't know, I didn't see a huge amount of stuff on this, but at one point there was a conversation being had that this was actually leading to, discrimination of various types, and these are all things that can actually be built into these tools. So it's important to realize that, that there is good and bad to any piece of software, and there's good and bad to the way that these systems are put together. I think generally, from the discrimination side of things, I think that because a lot of these software companies have moved a lot of that kind of feature set in-house, so you can customize what you're looking for, but you're doing it through the third-party contractor that you're working with for the ATS system. A lot of that's not going to happen on a regular basis because basically that company, that firm, now is going to tell you, hey, I'm just not going to. We're not going to play this game. So, let's give these guys a benefit of the doubt. I think in general, the intent here is simply to get the best employees, to minimize the kind of work that the HR teams and the recruiting teams are dealing with, and just kind of, be more efficient and be more timely on things. So let's talk about writing a resume. Right, a very good mindset to be in while writing a resume is to use the old, standby of KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. The reason this is a good idea is because fancy layouts and graphics, yes, even headshots, all of this stuff ends up actually causing issues with these resume scanners. So, there's a lot of people that talk about adding a headshot to a resume, how that might be a good thing. I think in a setting where you've already gotten an interview and you're doing your due diligence and bringing a paper copy with you, I think that's fine. Make sure it's on harder or thicker, paper stock, and make sure that, it's not creased, it's clean, make sure it looks good. Feel free to do that if you have an in-person interview. But I think when you're submitting applications and resumes to folks that you are not using fancy layouts, you're not using graphics, make sure you cover your bases, because if you don't, you're going to run into issues. So that's the basic, right? Keep it simple. These are basically gonna be garbled and destroyed by ATS systems. Images and graphics, fancy layouts. I'm a big fan, especially when I'm doing a paper resume, to have multiple columns. I think that it's a little cleaner, and for my time dealing with resumes, there's a lot of people that try to condense too much into a single page because that's such a big standard at this point. But yeah, So I think the first step outside of keeping it simple is to, write for the bot, then the person, right? At the end of the day, you do eventually get past, automated filtering of an ATS. You will get a live human recruiter. That's the way this works. Initial screening is going to be done by software. Then comes, some sort of a human recruiter, whether they're HR, whether they're, an official recruiter, whether it's a staffing agency, what have you. And their job is literally to put a human spin on what the ATS already kicked out to them. And then turn around and start, either kick that up to somebody else or start planning interviews. And honestly, when it comes down to it, the interviews are really going to be your time to shine. So make sure that you polish up your, soft skills for that. We will get into that in a later video. Don't make sure that you're using a font large enough to read by a human. Make sure you're not using outlandish colors. Honestly, personally, stick to black and white. Black text, white background, just in case they need to print it out, right? I do have an article about it, 21 resume tips that will get you more interviews in 2021. This is from offtheclockresumes.com. Definitely take a read on that. That was a fairly decent resource reading it. So the next piece, and there's going to be a lot of this, right? We're going to talk a lot about ATS because if we're really nailing down the software engineering side of things, ATS is basically going to be in every major company that we want to get hired by. That's going to be the first step, is to get best to bot. So we're going to talk about that a lot through this episode. In the early days of ATS systems, there weren't a huge amount of protections put into place. And people did all sorts of stuff trying to game ATS, right? Because, like I said, a lot of it has to do with keywords and aligning the keywords that you're using in your resume with the keywords that are in the specific job, description. And once that filter goes through, all of a sudden, if you have the vast majority of the job description on your resume, you're going to be in higher tiers than an individual that had, say, one or two of those. So what a lot of people did for a long time was to take the entire job description, switch their font to white, and to paste that repeatedly into white space throughout the entire resume. The bot would see it, but if it was printed out, it was in white font. It was in a white font and it couldn't be read, right? It got ignored by the printers. Well, here's the problem. Okay, don't do that. Please, dear God, don't do that. You will get found out. You will get screwed, and they will not hire you. And if they have any influence on other companies, you're going to get blackballed for that kind of stuff. The reality is most of these ATS systems at this point will actually take the resume that's brought in, and it will convert it into black and white, regardless of what the color of the resume is, just kind of as part of the preparation from receiving the document to sharing the document to the recruiting team, which means that if you paste the entire job description repeatedly throughout your resume in white, it's going to come out as black. If it's visible, they will know your game. Keywords are huge, though. Making sure, there is a common practice, and I personally struggle with this a little bit. I hate writing 12 different resumes to fit, very like job descriptions and very like roles that I'm applying for. It really does get frustrating. But the reality is that, I personally, I'll do more, especially with the roles that I've done in the past. I'll do more on the cover letter and making sure that the cover letter is unique for each and every employer. For software engineering specifically, it is a critical thing that every time you apply, you're taking the time to make sure that your resume is tailored to that specific employer. So what you're going to end up having is a pool of somewhere between, 5 and 1,000 resumes that you're sending out, depending on how many different roles you try to apply for. Because if you're applying for a front-end position and you apply for a back-end position, those are going to be two vastly different skill sets. You can include overlapping skills and stuff like that, but if it's not more tailored to the specific role and to the specific employer, it's not going to have all of the same keywords. Now, I've literally helped in the hiring, the training, the firing, of hundreds of people over the years. And I'll tell you, you can almost go too far in the opposite direction. It is important to do this next thing, okay? Think like an attorney, right? So it's very common for attorneys to tell you, right, never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to, right? That's a very common statement. You'll hear it from attorneys constantly. That's the hiring end of things, right? We're never going to ask you a question that we don't already know the answer to. During our vetting process, we have a pretty good idea who you are, what your skill set is, what your background is. We've probably pulled your social medias. We've looked at your portfolio. By the time you walk into an interview room, we know who you are. Well, here's the deal. Sometimes that's a bad thing. You don't want them to fully know who you are. And part of that is that, if you don't share specific values, some people will kick you out of the interview room, right? You're not worth their time. So it's best, especially when you're doing your resume and your cover letter, think like an attorney. The side of this is more, the original one is more for employers. This side's for you, right? Don't elaborate. Respond to the specific question with as few words as possible and do not elaborate past that. That's a big thing for resumes because what you'll see, and like I said, I've seen this hundreds, if not thousands of times. You will get resumes that are very, very verbose. I've gotten resumes, I kid you not, that were 5 pages long, front and back. These are people that have been in various industries for a very, very long time. They felt that it was very important to include all of their work. And, they really, really went way, way out in the left field. And it was a very extreme thing. When a hiring manager is looking at your resume in person, we're going to look at the job title up top. We might quickly skim through your summary. We're going to look at your previous jobs. We're going to look at your education real quick. And that's it. It's going to take us, 10 to 20 seconds. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at the information that's on your resume. If it's longer than a page, that second page is a waste of time. If you're going to provide 2 pages, make sure that it's in person, and your second page should only be, references, a list of references. I've gone into jobs where, and this is crazy for a lot of people to hear this, but I've gone into various job interviews that were panel interviews, and I've walked in with a copy of my resume, a bullet point list of references with phone numbers, emails, and their name, and I have gone in with a stack of reference letters. And the reason for that is that these are things that they're probably going to ask for. And I did this more in panel settings more than individual settings. Normally with that, I will bring, just the bare basics, and I'll tell them, hey, if you want references, I've got reference letters with me. I've got phone numbers with me. I'm more than happy to share that. But when you submit your resume through any sort of automated filtering system, you don't want all that. That is for the interview process. And the reason for that, and the reason why I'm bringing it up and actually kind of going off script a little bit, is this. By giving references and by giving reference letters, and I will actually go to the extent of getting a 3-ring binder. Let me back up. There was a panel interview that I did, and I actually, for the panel interview, I got the weirdest look on the face of the planet because I showed up to this panel interview where I knew that there were going to be 5 to 7 people sitting there, and I brought a box, like a file box, and inside of the file box was a binder for each and every person. In each one of the binders, there was a hard copy of my resume in a sleeve. There was a copy of my list of references in a sleeve. And then I had, probably 5 to 10 letters of reference as well. And any certifications I had that tied into that job. I forget what it was exactly. I want to say that it was a sales job of some sort. But the point was that by walking into the room with a box, first of all, it's going to throw them off. First of all, they're freaking out a little bit, right? I actually had the receptionist, before she let me in, actually open the top of the box to make sure it wasn't a bomb. No lie. It was a thing. And when I got into the interview room, I walked in, I set the box down on the table, I popped the top of it, and, the very first thing that I did was pull out a binder for each individual, including myself, and I passed them out. On the front of the binder, it said my name, it said my contact information, and it said the role that I was applying for. And then I sat down and I said, hello, it's nice to meet everybody. How's everybody's morning going? Because I threw everybody off balance. From a sales perspective, that was a brilliant technique. I don't know if I would encourage that unless you're going into, some sort of a role that requires you to present on a regular basis or a management role. But that really was an effective way of throwing the interviewers off tilt a little bit and to kind of make sure that I was memorable in that situation. That was one of those where the interviews were probably in the hundreds, if not thousands of applicants. So I really wanted to make sure that I nailed that one down. So let's dive back in here since I went off the rails for the last 5 minutes. The next one is saturation and exposure. And I really want to be clear. For UI UX, for front end, for back end, for full stack, anybody who's getting into software or web development in any capacity, you have to have saturation and exposure. And what I mean by saturation is you need to make sure that your name is starting to become recognizable, right? So, for example, there are individuals that will apply to the same companies. Usually these are going to be larger companies like Fang, and they're going to apply every 6 months because the policy is that we want you to have 6 months to a year to further, this is actually pretty close to the exact language that Shopify puts on their stuff. I was looking at theirs the other day, and this really made sense to me. But basically, they have a policy that they're not going to re-examine your resume, your skill set, your application until you get 6 months to 12 months worth of additional experience under your belt, and then they're happy to take a look at it again. And basically, the reasoning behind that policy is to make sure that they're not inundated with repeat applicants. They want to minimize that. They're not saying no forever, but what they are saying is that we want additional experience before we actually hire you. That's going to be most of the FANG companies, and that's going to be most mid to large companies, right? They don't want to be inundated with repeat applicants every 5 seconds. They want you, if they deny you, go build a project. If there's a specific company that you want to work for, go look at their website and build something similar. Don't clone it. Dear God, I'm tired of seeing clones. Dear God, if you want to apply for Facebook, stop cloning stuff. If you want to clone it, then you clone it and you build a cool feature. Add a feature that you want to add to that company's arsenal. Understand that if they see that feature, they may steal it from you. That idea may be jacked. But, just realize you need to prove to them, if you're denied, you need to prove to them that you're worth buying, right? So, and this is huge in the esports arena, right? And if you couldn't tell so far, I'm a big esports fan, specifically Call of Duty. And you'll hear people talk about pretty regularly on some of those podcasts pros do so much practicing that they don't want to do the content generation side of things. And the problem is that if you look, the guys who have retired or, the guys who are sitting on the bench or what have you, these guys are, streaming constantly because they have to keep their relevance, right? So here's where you need to go with this, right? Saturation exposure, number one, for the love of God, you need to have a clean, beautiful portfolio. I'm a big fan of minimalist and streamline and something that's heavily focused on any projects, any writing, any side hustles. For example, this podcast, content generation, speaking, any of those side activities, that's what you want to focus on, right? You want to make sure that when you hand over your information, you say, hey, not only do I have these projects, not only do I have this work experience, but you can understand and learn more about me by taking a look at these additional links, and you can get to know me on a more personal level, right? That's important. I made sure that here I actually linked 12 tips for building a strong developer portfolio. This came from Hack Reactor. I think it's really, really important that if you're struggling to get a job, you need to take a really, really hard look at your portfolio. You need to take a very critical look at the projects you're sharing, and you need to make sure that your resume, your cover letters, your social media presence, all of it is tip top. Because until you get a job, your full-time job should be making sure that you have projects that are being added. You're either adding features and refactoring projects from, if you're a JavaScript developer, switch it over to TypeScript so you can use it. If you're a full stack engineer, add something like GraphQL to your stack so that you can prove that, you're up with the latest and greatest. If you're already using GraphQL, take a look at Apollo. Add Apollo to your stack. Refactor your code so that it has that. But you need to show competence, and all of that starts with your portfolio. Your portfolio should be the nicest piece of work that you've ever done. It may be, 5 pages. You may have decided that you want to stick with HTML, CSS, maybe you're using Bootstrap or Material, but by God, that needs to be the nicest piece of work you've ever done. It needs to be snappy. It needs to be responsive. You need to make sure that your ARIA roles are in place the correct way. You need to make sure you're not only using one H1. You need to make sure you're only using a couple H2s. You need to make sure that all of your semantic UI or semantic HTML stuff is top notch. They are going, if they're interested in you, there's a good chance they're going to click F12 and inspect your page. Just being real. I hesitate, but I would almost just put a GitHub link showing your portfolio. That way they don't even have to do that. They can just look at the source code as a whole. Now, I want to point out, I've mentioned it before, and, I actually went out of my way originally as I started the podcast to let the guys over at Syntax know. They were a big piece of why I decided to start this podcast. I think that there's not enough saturation when it comes to podcasts, especially ones that that kind of touch the surface of topics and then kind of force you to climb into the rabbit hole on your own, right? And I think that that's a really, really big key component here. Huge shout out to Wes Boss and Scott. I suck at Scott's last name. I'm not even going to try. It'd be horrible. I apologize. But those guys really, they know what they're doing. Their podcast is light years better than this one. Hopefully with time we get there. But they did an amazing job going over, different tips for a good portfolio. If you haven't done it, go over to syntax.fm and go through and just look at all of their resume ones. They actually will spend time going over different, portfolios. Specifically, I have linked the episode that I think they really started diving into it, and they went over a lot of tips. It was episode 133. It's linked in the show notes. Take a look at them. If you feel like doing it, you're more than welcome to shout out, let them know that I sent you. I'd appreciate it. I'm sure that they'd be excited to hear it too. But generally, they are awesome at this. Both of them have a ton of experience. Both of them are extremely good educators. And I mean, that's how they make their living, right? Is their courses and educating people. So let's talk about exposure. Okay. Exposure, again, basically when I say that, I'm talking about starting to get name recognition. Most employers these days are going to look at your socials. They're going to look at Twitter. They're going to look at LinkedIn. They're going to try and see what they can find on Instagram. They're going to try and find what they can, basically everywhere that they can. There's a good chance that you've been Google searched the whole nine. YouTube, obviously. But you need to make sure that your social media, is appropriate. First and foremost, I'm a big fan of locking the hell out of my Facebook. My Facebook is not for general consumption. It is for my family, my friends, and outside of that, it's nobody's business. That's all it's used for. Is keeping in touch with family pictures, stuff like that. YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, I've got stuff up. Again, those I don't really worry about. I do really focus on Twitter to make sure that the majority of what I'm sharing is relevant to software, is relevant towards, presenting, my best self to others. I don't talk politics on Twitter. That's a massive faux pas for me. I don't think Twitter should be political. I think that, I'm not a big fan of politics on social media, period, just to be real. But yeah, you want to make sure that you're not just like blasting people and acting, unprofessional. Definitely make sure that you keep everything in bounds. If you do things like podcasting, content creation, make sure that you're cross-linking everything together. It's basic. It's a few minutes of time. It's not a huge ordeal. But in part, cross-linking everything together shows that you have at least a very basic understanding of social media marketing. And that's always a good plus to have on your resume, right? Moving on. For the love of sweet baby Jesus, spelling and grammar matter. If you don't have it already, there is a free add-on that you can use with basically any Chromium browser. It is called Grammarly. Download it. Use it. If you really want to dive in, you want to make sure that you're, presenting basically master's level work, pay for the premium so that you get, the additional features that help elevate what you're writing. If you're good at technical writing and writing resumes and you're comfortable with it, stick with the free one. It will do basic grammar stuff, and it will do spelling as well. Spell check everything. Hit it with a grammar check. Make sure that when you're doing those checks, you're not changing words to something that they're not supposed to be. That does happen. We're still using, computers to basically bypass our intelligence. And I think honestly, and I have, to be honest with you, I did include a link for, a step-by-step guide to increase your business writing skills. Instructionalsolutions.com wrote it. Definitely take a look if you struggle with business writing. It's a good thing to know, and being very competent in it actually opens the door to a lot of different jobs, not just the ones that you're looking at for software. Equally as big is QA your resume. If you don't know, testing in software is a very, very sought after skill. It's very important, especially to larger companies. Most of them basically won't hire you if you don't know how to do testing. QAing your resume is basically sanity testing it to make sure that it works. Have other people review your resume. If you have friends that are hiring managers, have them treated in the same way that they would any other applicant. if you have any recruiter or HR friends, have them review it. Take the input that you are given as in the route that it was intended. Tell these people to be as blunt and honest, and to print it out, take a red pen, and anything and everything that they see, you want them to crucify your resume. Why? It's not to generate more work, I'll tell you that. But if you have people that have that kind of skill set, you want them to rip your resume to shreds so that you can put it back together using the input that you've been given, right? You want your resume to be the best that it possibly can, because if it's the best it possibly can, guess what? You're going to get a job in a faster, more efficient way. And yes, I'm talking about, any resume you write. If you're writing 100 of them, you let people know, hey, I'm really serious about getting a job. I'm going to send you my resume before I send it every single time. You cool with that? You down to have my back like that? Sweet, let's go. Obviously, ask permission. Don't just send them 100 different resumes to read through. Make sure that, you give them adequate time to actually look through it. And make sure that you respect their time. If they're doing that big of a favor to you, go buy them dinner. Take them out for drinks. Buy them tickets to the game. Buy them tickets to a concert. Rent them an Airbnb on the beach for a weekend. Do something nice for the people that are supporting you. Make sure that you're not just abusing their friendship. All right, so next, using technology to fight technology, right? There's a big one, right? It's going to be a piece of software that scans your resume, right? So doesn't it make sense that there are already services that use a very similar, if not identical, type of software to scan your resume before you submit it? There is. There 100% is. And dear God, that's what's next. Scan your resume. Use a resume scanner. They cost a few bucks. Who cares? Because you're going to have a massive return on your investment. If you can get your resume scanning at a very high number, if you're getting scored high with the resume scanners, you're going to get scanned high with the company you're going for. And guess what? There's a lot of scanners that you can actually copy the job description so that it's scanning based upon that job description to make sure that your resume is hitting all the pressure points it needs to get that job. Okay? Now, I'm a big fan of making sure that my LinkedIn is the same way. I don't know if you've ever clicked the little more button and downloaded your LinkedIn profile, but it literally turns it into a resume. Okay? It's actually really cool. So there are LinkedIn scanners too. We're going to talk about those in just a second. The resume and LinkedIn scanner that I've been playing with that I like so far is from resumeworded.com. Links to the show notes. Check it out. And I want to be clear, none of the people that I'm linking to, none of these guys are sponsors. None of them, my opinions are my own. They're not anybody else's. I'm just trying to give you resources to take a look at to try and help. There's some free side to the Resume Worded scanners. I actually spent probably 4 or 5 hours the other day poking at my LinkedIn with it, because they do LinkedIn and they do your resume. Take the time, right? So here's the next piece, right? I've talked about, I've really heavily talked about, think like an attorney. Make sure that your stuff is clean and concise and to the point. Make sure you're hitting keywords. Make sure that it's, spelling, grammar checked. Make sure that you're hitting, all the stuff that they're looking for. Make sure you're not trying to game the ATS. The next one, and I think this is more when it comes down to social media stuff and portfolio, but your resume too. These are a reflection of who you are. This is your ability before you even walk into an interview to show your potential employer, the people that you want to work for, who you are. You know, I've talked a lot of different things that if you add them all together, it's a lot of work. I'm going to put it into perspective here in a minute, but you know, culture has become king. You know, people don't want to apply for companies who have a gross culture. You know, they don't want to work for a company where the culture is we're going to work you 80 hours a week, and if you don't like it, you can quit. They don't want to work for a company like that just basically is going to chew you up and spit you out. You want to work for a company that understands that you need days off, that understand that occasionally you're going to have doctor's appointments and you need to do that. You want to work for a company that actually wants to elevate your skill set and help you develop into being better at your job, right? That you want a company that's willing to, you know, invest in you and your skill set to make you better so that you can be better for the company, right? You know, the last piece of the puzzle here is you need to make sure that you're showing your personality in a good way and that you're showing these companies that you're going to be a good fit for their culture. Because if you're not, you know, you could be the next Einstein. They're not going to hire you. It's still going to be really hard. I mean, there's some companies that are purely based on talent, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you from a sales perspective, a lot of these companies that are based entirely on your talent level, your production level, they're going to chew you up and spit you out. You are a number. Because at the end of the day, what a lot of these companies can do is look at these thousands of resumes, hold them on file for 90 days, and as they have turnover, which is inevitable for companies like this, they're going to just get the next one down. It's the next, man or woman up. It's baseball. Somebody gets hit in the head with a baseball, it's going to be the next hitter up. Make sure that you're showing that you're a good fit for the culture. Before I get to the closing, I'm going to go off script again here, but this sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but it's important work. Hiring employees for a lot of companies is actually a very scary prospect. It means you're taking an unknown variable and trying to meld it into a very well-known variable, into a very well-known equation that's already been tried and true. If your team's working, adding another piece to that team, it can be literally terrifying for some employers. There are some employers that would rather work understaffed just because they don't want to hire a new person because it could potentially throw off the entire environment. Okay? It's a lot of work from, the job seeking side of things. It is. But the reason that is so important is because it also shows that you have the determination and the drive that, by God, no matter what gets thrown at you, you are hitting the gas and you're going to get hired by somebody. And I swear to God, I am not kidding. I have walked into interviews and I've looked at them dead in the face. This was sales. I looked them dead in the face and went, you know what? I'm happy to be here. I'm really happy for an opportunity to get to know you guys and kind of share my experience and stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm getting hired by somebody. Is it going to be you or is it going to be somebody else? Don't be cocky. Don't show your ass. But you definitely, once you put in the work to actually do all the stuff that I'm talking about, once you're putting in that work, you should have nothing to be ashamed of. You should be able to walk into an interview with your head held high, confident, and look at the people that are potentially going to employ you and look at them dead in the face. It's like, I'm good at what I do. I put in my work. I've showed you that I'm good at what I do. I'm ready for a job. Is it you or is it somebody else? That's fair. Because you know what? On the other side of the table, that's exactly what they're saying. Show me why I should hire you. Tell me why. Tell me why you're going to be a good fit for my company. Tell me how you're going to be a good fit for my culture. Tell me how you're going to get the work done that I need done. I've shown you. Look at my portfolio. I've shown you that I can produce and I can, honest to God, do the job that you need, and I can do it in a good way. I've also taken the time with my portfolio, my resume, my cover letters, giving you a good presentation to make sure that you're aware I have the drive and the determination that not only do I want to be in this industry, not only do I want this job, I deserve this job. If you walk into an interview and you're meek and you're quiet and you're shaking like a leaf and you don't have your head held high and you don't have the confidence, you're not going to get that job. I think it's probably 1% the chance that you're going to get that job, because the reality is that 9 times out of 10, if you've got the confidence to back up the skills and the skills to back up the confidence, you are vastly more likely to get a job. And as far as how hard this is, I want to be clear. I used to have to walk all the way through my little town. Basically, the whole town is about 3.5 miles from tip to tip, the route that I went. There were a couple extra spots. Basically, I was walking. When I went out and I canvassed for applications and I did resume drops, basically I would walk 5 miles over the course of a day, come home, go through 50 or 100 applications and fill them out with pen. Pencil first. Make sure you can erase before you screw something up. And then I would have to turn around and backtrack all the way through all of them. And a lot of companies, up until, doing online, resumes and applications became really popular, you would have to check back in person. Calling, they thought you were rude. Plus, you don't know when their busy hours are a lot of times. So you would literally have to backtrack yourself. You would have to walk 15 miles a week, really, to check in with people 3 times a week, or to do resume drops, or to do applications, or what have you. You were covering a pretty large area, and if you didn't have a car and you were walking, and mind you, I'm talking all the way back when I was 14, 15 years old, looking for my first jobs. I was walking down the street. Now, mind you, you're doing that. When you did that, you were wearing slacks, you were wearing a suit or a tie or a dress shirt. Like you were dressing 5 levels above what you wanted. You were showing, hey, I want this job. That's not as bad. It's not as bad as that anymore. We have different challenges. Now you don't have to be in the middle of the summer with 110 degree heat walking down the road. You get to sit in your air-conditioned house, or your house with fans on, or what have you, whatever your situation is. You get to sit in the comfort of your own home in PJs, and you're typing away at a keyboard, which is far less straining than writing with a pen. Dear God, my hand cramped hundreds of times doing that. And you sitting stuff out. And then most times at this point, it is fairly well accepted, except for like really, really entry-level jobs, fast food, retail, stuff like that, that is pretty widely accepted that you're able to, pick up the phone and make a phone call to check in, or shoot an email off to follow up. It's easier than it used to be in some ways. It's harder in some ways, right? There's a lot more knowledge about who you are before you walk through the door. I'll tell you that. Now, obviously this is a conversation I'm passionate about in a lot of different ways. It's really, really important. It's a big piece of the puzzle. I've talked about it, off and on for, years to various people. But yeah, let's get this thing closed. Let's get out the door today. In closing, I want to say that software engineers, graphic designers, photographers, videographers, basically any occupation that requires you to have a portfolio, have more moving pieces to ensure that you get hired. Okay? It's a little easier for, people that get licensures and stuff like that, because most of that is just checking to make sure your bona fides work. That said, off the bat, we all get higher wages if we can break into the industry. So it's a huge, worthwhile endeavor Put a ton of effort into building your portfolio, your resume, your cover letters. Basically, you need to make your resumes, cover letters, and your portfolio your job until you get a job. Tweak, analyze, optimize all of them until something works. Use both free and paid tools to ensure that your digital presence is optimal. Make sure that you're using those to make sure that your cover letters and your resumes are hitting those keywords. Help people get to know you before they even interview you. And make sure that when you do go into that interview, even if it's a Zoom call or a Teams call, that you are dressed to impress. And this is one that kind of has slacked a little bit. It's less of a thing these days, but I think it's still important. Dress above the job that you want. Okay? If you're, for example, if you want to be in a sales job, don't show up in jeans. I mean, even if they're nice, don't show up in jeans and a button-up shirt and loafers, right? If you want a sales job, suit and tie all the way. You want to go work for that, Honda or Toyota dealership. You want to go and you want to, break in with a real estate agency. You want to go sell it. You want to go into insurance and sell insurance. Suit and tie. Dress nicer than your boss's boss. Straight up. It's old school. It's just as old school as a handshake and eye contact. But I'm telling you, from a confidence perspective, from a interviews are performance. If you can't perform, it's going to be a struggle. But that's a piece of the pie, because if you look good, you're going to feel good. If you feel good, you're going to exude more confidence. That's it, folks. Thanks. I want to thank everybody for listening. We've already gone over 100 listens from all the episodes. This has been going a little over a month at this point. This is an important project for me. This podcast, getting it off the ground, getting it some popularity, some legs. I really am passionate about teaching people and making people feel a little bit more comfortable with some of the unknowns that come with software engineering. It's a big thing for me. So, make sure that you do your part. If you're listening on, one of the podcast outlets, Apple, Google, Spotify, make sure you follow and rate it. Any feedback you give, I'm going to take a look at, and I'm going to follow up on. I'm not making money off this at this point. So just understand that, I'm still tweaking the sound, making sure sound quality is as good as it's going to be. I'm using equipment that I already had, or that's relatively affordable. Down the road, my intention is to get to the point where I have an entire room that's a studio to do this. That's long term. That's the plan. That's the hope. That's the dream. A big piece of this is make sure you check out the YouTube. It is linked basically everywhere that I could possibly link it. YouTube is set up in such a way that I don't have a custom URL yet. When I do, I will be changing the URL to JavaScript Lifestyles. Make sure you click that link, get in there, click on the subscribe button. I don't even care if you click the bell. I would say click the bell because I'll be putting all the episodes up in video form. Eventually we'll get to the point where with some of the guests, I'll actually have full-on video that you can watch. But anything you guys can do to help build the audience, like it, share it, follow it, rate it, give it a review, subscribe on YouTube, please do. It's going to help the channel. And you know what? I guarantee you that there's some people that this is going to be hugely helpful. There's going to be other people that I basically just spewed the same crap that you heard all the way since high school. I get it. We're going to do our best. We ask that you support us in that endeavor. And we're going to keep building a content community that, we keep giving you stuff. Next week, I will be bringing in our first guest. That is my hope. There might be some last minute scheduling stuff. That's always a possibility. But my hope is next week we have our first guest. And I will tell you, that it's going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about, the topic, if I can get my guest in. We're going to talk about giving back to the community a little bit. We're going to talk about leadership skills. We're going to talk about, some soft skills. And, hopefully you get some great information. We're going to talk about housing the homeless out in Washington, kind of one of the projects that's being done for that, which is where this person currently works. I'm super excited about it. I hope you're excited about it. All right, screw this. I'll see you next week. You guys have a great weekend.